The first sign that my family had already decided my fate came disguised as a favor. It was 3 days before Christmas, snow still clinging to the edges of the sidewalks in Evanston, Illinois, when my mother called and asked me to come early to help set the table. Her voice was light, almost cheerful, the way it always was when she needed something and didn't want questions. "Just come an hour before everyone else," she said. "Your sister will be busy. I could use you." I agreed without hesitation. I always did. My name is Natalie Harper. I was 34 years old then, recently promoted to regional operations manager at a logistics company in Chicago, divorced for 2 years, no children. I lived alone in a modest condo 15 minutes from my parents' house, close enough to be available, far enough to pretend I had my own life. If you had asked me that morning how my relationship with my family was, I would have said complicated, but stable. That's the lie I had been telling myself for years. I arrived at my parents' house at 4 o'clock sharp. The house was large, 2 stories, brick, the kind of place my grandmother used to call solid. My parents bought it 30 years ago, when my father's construction company started taking off. It had been renovated twice since then, always quietly, always without discussion. My mother, Elaine Harper, opened the door with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You're early," she said. "You asked me to be," I replied. She stepped aside and let me in. The house smelled like rosemary and roasted meat. Christmas music played softly from the kitchen speaker. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect. "Where's Dad?" I asked, hanging my coat. "In his office," she said. "Working." That was new. My father, Richard Harper, rarely worked on holidays anymore. He liked to say he'd earned the right not to, but I didn't question it. I went straight to the dining room and began setting the table. It was a long table, polished wood, seating 10. My mother hovered nearby, directing me where to place each setting, even though I'd done this every year since I was 12. "Not that napkin," she said. "Use the embroidered ones. This is a special dinner." "Isn't it always?" I asked lightly. She didn't answer. That should have been my second warning. My older sister, Lauren, arrived half an hour later. She swept in wearing a cream-colored coat, hair perfectly styled, phone already in her hand. Lauren was 36, married, 2 kids, and the unquestioned center of my parents' universe. "Natalie," she said, air-kissing my cheek. "Thanks for coming early. Mom said you'd help." Of course she did. Lauren barely glanced at the table before heading into the kitchen to pour herself wine. She didn't offer me any. She never did. By 5:30, everything was ready. The house was quiet in that suspended way it gets before guests arrive. My mother wiped an already clean counter. Lauren scrolled on her phone. I stood there, suddenly feeling like I was waiting for something I hadn't been told about. That was when my father emerged from his office. He was holding a folder, not papers, a folder. Thick, manila. "Natalie," he said, his voice measured. "Come sit down for a minute." Lauren looked up immediately. My mother froze. I felt my stomach tighten. We sat at the dining table, the same one I'd just set. My father placed the folder in front of him, but didn't open it yet. "There's something we need to discuss," he said, "before everyone gets here." My mother folded her hands. Lauren crossed her legs. I waited. "We've been doing some planning," my father continued. "Estate planning, business planning. It's time." Time. Another word that never meant what it sounded like. "I see," I said. Lauren smiled faintly, already knowing more than I did. I could tell by the way she avoided my eyes. "This isn't a big announcement," my mother said quickly. "We just wanted to let you know." "Let me know." "Let me know what?" I asked. My father finally opened the folder. I saw legal letterhead, tabs, signatures. "We're updating the will," he said, "and formalizing succession for the company, the Harper Group." My father's construction and property management business started small, now worth millions. Something he used to say belonged to both his daughters equally. "And?" I said. My father cleared his throat. "Lauren will be taking over ownership interests," he said, "effective next quarter." I stared at him. "Ownership interests," I repeated. Lauren shifted in her chair. "It just makes sense," she said. "Given my situation." Her situation. Married, children, stability. All the things I was constantly reminded I lacked. "What about me?" I asked. My mother smiled, that careful smile again. Natalie, you've always been so independent, she said. You have your career, your own income. My pulse began to pound in my ears. So I'm being excluded, I said. No one said that, my father replied sharply. Don't jump to conclusions. Then explain it, I said. My father slid one document toward me. Not the folder, just a single page. It was a waiver. I signed this? I asked, recognizing my signature at the bottom. You signed it years ago, my mother said, when you were on the advisory board. I scanned the text quickly. Legal language. Dense. Cold. Hereby waives any claim to controlling ownership. I felt the room tilt. You had me sign this without explaining, I said. You didn't ask, Lauren said quietly. That was when it clicked. This wasn't sudden. This wasn't new. This was planned. Slow. Methodical. And I had been useful just long enough to make it legal. You want me to be quiet, I said. That's why you asked me to come early. No one denied it. The sound of the doorbell rang out from the front of the house. Guests arriving. Laughter outside. My mother stood up. Let's not ruin Christmas, she said. We'll talk later. Later. Always later. I looked down at the table I had set so carefully. In that moment, I realized something that changed everything. This wasn't love. It was control. And I had just been formally removed from the picture. As I stood there, surrounded by my family's silence, I understood one thing with terrifying clarity. If I didn't act now, this would be the version of my life they would write for me, and I would disappear from it, quietly. The front door opened again, voices filling the house, and I forced a smile. But inside, something had already begun to harden, and it wasn't going to let this go. Christmas dinner went on as if nothing had happened. That was the strangest part. The house filled with voices, coats piled by the door, children running through the hallway. My Aunt Margaret brought her usual pie. My Uncle Thomas argued with my father about football. Lauren's husband Daniel poured wine and laughed too loudly at my father's jokes. The table I had set became the center of warmth and noise, and I sat there, nodding, smiling, passing dishes, while something inside me quietly shut down. No one mentioned the folder. No one looked at me with concern. It was as if the conversation before dinner had been wiped clean, sealed away behind polite holiday tradition. I watched my mother closely. Elaine moved through the room like a practiced host, refilling glasses, adjusting candles, making sure everyone was comfortable. She didn't once ask if I was okay. Not with her eyes, not with her voice, not even with a hand on my shoulder. Lauren avoided me entirely. She spoke over me when I tried to add to conversations, redirected attention back to her children, her plans, her new kitchen renovation. Every so often, I caught her glancing at my plate, at my hands, as if checking whether I might do something unpredictable. I didn't. That restraint would later be described as my strength. At the time, it felt like paralysis. When dessert was served, my father stood and raised his glass. To family, he said, and to the future. Everyone echoed it. I swallowed mine down with a bitterness I didn't bother hiding. That night, after the guests left and the house finally quieted, my mother cornered me in the kitchen. You were very composed, she said, rinsing dishes that were already clean. I appreciate that. I didn't realize this was a performance, I replied. She stiffened slightly. You're being dramatic. No, I said. I'm being observant. She sighed, turning to face me. Natalie, you've always been sensitive. There it was. The word she used whenever my reaction didn't serve her. You signed the waiver, she continued. We didn't force you. You didn't explain it, I said. You knew I trusted you. Her expression softened, but not in a way that felt genuine. We did what was best for the family. For Lauren, I said. For stability, she corrected. I nodded slowly. Then I assume you won't mind sending me copies of everything. She paused. Just a beat too long. Your father will handle that, she said. There's no need to get lawyers involved. I didn't mention lawyers, I replied. She turned back to the sink. Conversation over. I left shortly after. No hug. No goodbye beyond a distracted wave. The drive home felt longer than usual. The streets were quiet, holiday lights blinking in windows I passed without seeing. My hands were steady on the wheel. My mind was not. That night, I didn't cry. I opened my laptop instead. I searched my email for anything related to the Harper Group. Advisory board documents, meeting notes, PDFs I'd signed without reading closely because my father had always framed them as routine. Administrative. Nothing to worry about. By midnight, I had found 3 more waivers. Different wording, same outcome. Each one had been signed during moments when I was trying to prove I was helpful. Cooperative. Easy. I felt something settle into place then. Not anger. Understanding. This wasn't favoritism born of affection. It was strategy. Lauren had the life my parents valued. Marriage, children, predictability. I had ambition, mobility, opinions. They hadn't trusted me with control because they couldn't control me. The next morning, I called in sick to work. My promotion had been announced only a month earlier. Regional Operations Manager. A role I'd fought for, earned. One that required focus. I couldn't focus. I made coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and stared at the wall for a long time before making a decision that felt small, but wasn't. I called an attorney. Her name was Melissa Grant. I found her through a professional referral, not Google. She specialized in estate disputes and family-owned businesses. Chicago-based, mid-40s, known for being precise. When she answered, I didn't tell her a story. I told her facts. My parents updated their will and business succession plan, I said. I believe I was excluded through documents I signed without full disclosure. There was a pause. Do you have copies? She asked. Some, I said. Not all. Then the first thing we do, she said, is get everything. How? I asked. Formally, she replied. And quietly, I hung up, feeling something unfamiliar. Relief. Over the next week, my parents acted as if nothing had changed. My mother sent me a recipe. My father forwarded an article about the construction market. Lauren texted once to ask if I could babysit the kids next weekend. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded Melissa the documents I had. She reviewed them quickly. These are carefully written, she said during our follow-up call. But that doesn't mean they're airtight. What are they relying on? I asked. Your silence, she said, and your reluctance to make this uncomfortable. That hit harder than I expected. She requested formal disclosure on my behalf. A letter. Neutral tone. No accusations. Just a request for full documentation related to the will, trust structures, and corporate governance. The response came from my father's attorney, not him. Brief. Delayed. Incomplete. They're withholding, Melissa said. Which suggests there's more. That evening, my father called. Natalie, he said. Why are you making this adversarial? I asked for information, I replied. That shouldn't be adversarial. You're overreacting, he said. This is business. Then treat it like business, I said. He exhaled sharply. Your mother is very upset. I'm sure, I replied. Lauren is counting on this, he added. I know, I said. There was a long silence on the line. You've changed, he said finally. Yes, I replied. I have. I hung up before he could say more. That night, Melissa sent me a message. There's a trust, she wrote. An older one. Your grandmother's name is on it. My heart skipped. She left something to both daughters, Melissa continued. It may still be active. I stared at the screen, the implications slowly forming. If that trust existed, it meant my parents hadn't just excluded me. They'd worked around something they couldn't erase. And that meant this wasn't just a family disagreement anymore. It was a calculated move, one they hadn't expected me to notice. As I closed my laptop, I felt the ground shift beneath me. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was preparing. And whatever they thought they had settled before Christmas was about to become very unsettled indeed. The trust had a name. That mattered more than I expected. Melissa called me the next morning, her voice steady, businesslike. It's called the Eleanor Harper Irrevocable Trust, she said. Established 19 years ago. Eleanor Harper. My grandmother. I closed my eyes. My grandmother had died when I was in my early 20s. Quiet woman, observant, the kind who listened more than she spoke and remembered everything. She had lived in a modest house until the day she died, even after my father's company took off. She never liked excess. She liked fairness. What does it say? I asked. I don't have the full document yet, Melissa said, but I can see the registration. It lists 2 beneficiaries, equal, Lauren and me, I said. Yes, she replied. Which means your parents could not simply eliminate your interest without either dissolving the trust legally or obtaining your consent. I felt my jaw tighten. So they didn't remove me. They worked around it. That's what it looks like, Melissa said. They shifted control, revenue streams, and decision-making authority into structures not directly owned by the trust. In other words, they hollowed it out. That afternoon, Melissa sent a formal notice requesting a full trust accounting. Not accusatory, just procedural. A request any beneficiary was entitled to make. The response didn't come. 2 days passed, then 3. On the 4th day, my mother called. Her voice was brittle, controlled, the way it got when she felt cornered. "Why are you digging this up?" she asked. "Your grandmother's trust was never meant to cause conflict. It was meant to protect fairness," I replied. She sighed. "You're interpreting things through hurt." "I'm interpreting documents," I said. She lowered her voice. "This is embarrassing for your father." I almost laughed. Almost. "I wasn't consulted when you embarrassed me," I said. "That's not the same," she snapped. "No," I agreed. "It's worse." She went quiet. "You don't understand how complicated this is," she said finally. "I understand enough," I replied. "That's why I'm asking for transparency." She hung up without saying goodbye. That same evening, Lauren texted, "Can we talk? This is getting out of hand." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. "If you want to say something, put it in writing," I typed. A pause, then 3 dots, then nothing. Silence was becoming a pattern. Melissa called me on Friday with an update. "They acknowledge the trust exists," she said, "but they're disputing your interpretation of its scope." "Meaning?" I asked. "They're claiming the trust was symbolic," she said, "intended for legacy, not control." I let out a slow breath. "That's convenient." "It is," she agreed. "And weak." She explained it carefully. The trust held minority interests in several core properties. Not the majority, but enough to matter. Enough to trigger fiduciary obligations. Enough that rerouting income without disclosure could be challenged. "They assumed you wouldn't push," Melissa said, "that you'd accept whatever narrative they gave you." I thought about the Christmas table, the folder. The waiver slid across to me like an afterthought. "They trained me not to push," I said. "Yes," Melissa replied. "And now you are." The next move came from my father, not through lawyers. Directly. He showed up at my condo on Sunday afternoon. I hadn't invited him. I opened the door and found him standing there, hands in his coat pockets, looking older than I remembered. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside. He walked in slowly, taking in the space like it surprised him. My life, my independence. The one thing he'd always said he admired, right up until it became inconvenient. "You didn't tell us you were going to involve attorneys," he said. "I asked for documents," I replied. "You didn't provide them." He sat down heavily on the couch. "This is tearing the family apart," he said. "No," I replied. "It's revealing it." He rubbed his forehead. "Your grandmother didn't intend for this trust to be used like this." "Used like what?" I asked. "To ensure I wasn't erased?" He looked up sharply. "No one erased you." I met his eyes. "Then why does everything that mattered move forward without me?" He didn't answer. Instead, he said something else. Something telling. "You've always been difficult to predict." There it was. I nodded slowly. "And Lauren isn't. She's stable," he said. "She has children, responsibilities." "And I don't?" I asked. He shifted uncomfortably. "You have options." That word again. Options. As if exclusion were a compliment. "I'm not asking for control," I said calmly. "I'm asking for accountability." He stood abruptly. "If you keep this up, there will be consequences." I tilted my head. "Like what?" He hesitated. Just a second too long. "You're putting yourself in a bad position," he said. I smiled faintly. "I was already in one. You just didn't think I'd notice." He left without another word. That night, Melissa emailed me something that made my stomach drop. "They've been contacting third parties," she wrote. "Board members, business partners, framing you as unstable." I felt a cold clarity settle in. "They're trying to isolate me," I replied. "Yes," she said. "And that escalates things." She drafted a cease and desist letter immediately. Not aggressive, just firm, warning against interference. At the same time, she requested court-supervised accounting of the trust, not public. yet. This forces them to respond formally, she said. They won't be able to manage this with silence anymore. The filing went in on Monday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, my phone was ringing non-stop. Calls from family friends, from my aunt, from my cousin, all asking variations of the same question. What's going on? I didn't explain. I didn't defend myself. I said the same thing every time. I'm protecting my interests. By Wednesday, Lauren called. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was short. You're going to regret this. I listened to it once, then deleted it. That evening, Melissa called with news. They're requesting mediation, she said, quickly. Why? I asked. Because they're losing control of the timeline, she replied, and they don't like that. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. This had started as a quiet Christmas conversation, a folder, a waiver, a request to come early and help. Now it had a name, a trust, a legal process. And for the first time in my life, my family wasn't directing the outcome. They were reacting to me. As I prepared for mediation, one thought kept returning, steady and undeniable. They hadn't expected me to step out of my role, and they had no idea what to do now that I had. Mediation was scheduled for the second week of January. Neutral location, downtown Chicago. Conference room with glass walls and a view of the river. The kind of place meant to signal professionalism, not family history. Melissa insisted we arrive early. They'll try to set the tone, she said. We don't let them. When I walked into the room, my parents were already there. My mother sat rigidly at the table, purse clutched in her lap like armor. My father stood by the window, phone to his ear, voice low. Lauren sat beside them, perfectly composed, legs crossed, scrolling as if this were an inconvenience she'd already moved past. Seeing them like that did something unexpected. It didn't hurt. It clarified. We weren't here because they wanted resolution. We were here because they were uncomfortable. The mediator, a middle-aged man named Thomas Keller, began with rules, confidentiality, respect, purpose. He spoke calmly, deliberately, as if he'd seen every version of this story before. Let's start with the facts, he said. Melissa did not speak first. She let their attorney, a man named Gregory Holt, present their position. The Harper family has always acted in good faith, Holt said. The trust in question was never intended to convey operational control. Any changes made were lawful and appropriate. My father nodded. My mother stared at the table. Melissa waited until Holt finished before speaking. The issue, she said evenly, is not intent. It is disclosure. She slid a document across the table. This trust holds minority interests in 5 properties, she continued. Revenue from those properties was redirected through newly created management entities without beneficiary notification. Holt adjusted his glasses. Those entities were created for efficiency. Efficiency does not negate fiduciary duty, Melissa replied. Lauren leaned forward. This is ridiculous, she said. You're making it sound sinister. I looked at her for the first time since arriving. You didn't think I deserved to know, I said quietly. Her mouth tightened. That's not what this is about. That's exactly what it's about, I replied. The mediator raised a hand. Let's keep emotions in check. Melissa nodded. We're not here to assign motives. We're here to establish compliance. She laid out the request clearly. Full trust accounting, independent valuation, suspension of further restructuring until review was complete. My father finally spoke. This is unnecessary, he said. We were handling this internally. Without me, I said. He turned to me, irritation flashing. You're overreacting. No, I said. I'm responding to what I was shown. Lauren exhaled sharply. You always do this, she said. You make everything harder than it needs to be. I met her gaze. You call it harder because it doesn't benefit you. Silence. The mediator shifted in his chair. I sense a lack of trust, he said carefully. That's because trust was abused, Melissa replied. The room grew quiet. Then Holt cleared his throat. We're prepared to discuss a buyout, he said, to resolve this amicably. I didn't respond. Melissa did. My client is not interested in being paid to disappear, she said. Lauren scoffed. What do you want then? I answered before Melissa could. I want transparency, I said, and my rights respected. My mother looked up then, eyes sharp. You're doing this to punish us. I shook my head. I'm doing this so I don't get punished again. The mediator called for a break. In the hallway, Melissa leaned toward me. They're rattled, she said. The buyout offer came too fast. I don't want to sell, I said. Not like that. Then we don't, she replied. We let them sit with the consequences. When we returned, the tone had shifted. Holt proposed a temporary accounting review. Limited scope. Internal oversight. Melissa declined. Independent, she said. Or we proceed formally. My father's jaw tightened. My mother whispered something to Lauren. Lauren finally spoke again. If you do this, she said, you're going to destroy everything Dad built. I looked at her calmly. He built it by excluding me, I said. That's not something I'm responsible for preserving. The mediator ended the session without resolution. Outside, as we stood by the elevators, my mother reached for my arm. You don't have to do this, she said softly. We can fix it. I stepped back. You had years to fix it, I said. You chose not to. She looked genuinely shaken. That was new. As we parted, Melissa turned to me. They'll escalate, she said. But so will we. That night, alone in my condo, I replayed the session in my mind. Not the arguments, the moments between them. The way my parents spoke about me without ever speaking to me. The way Lauren framed my presence as disruption. The way none of them once asked what this had cost me. I opened my laptop and reviewed the trust documents again. Then I did something I hadn't planned. I started writing a timeline. Every meeting, every signature, every exclusion, every quiet decision made without me. It took hours. When I finished, I realized something that stopped me cold. This wasn't about inheritance. It was about erasure. And once you see that clearly, you can't unsee it. The next morning, Melissa called with an update. They've agreed to an independent trustee, she said, reluctantly. That's good, I replied. It is, she said, but it means they're preparing for the next move. I stared out the window at the city below. So was I. Because now that control had shifted, even slightly, I could feel it. They were no longer managing me. They were afraid of what I might do next. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid at all. The independent trustee was appointed 2 weeks later. Her name was Marjorie Keene, former probate judge, retired, known for being methodical, immune to emotional appeals, and deeply unimpressed by family drama disguised as tradition. Melissa smiled when she told me the name. This is who you want, she said. She doesn't care who your parents are. That alone felt like a small victory. The first thing Judge Keene did was issue a formal request for records. Not a suggestion, not a courtesy, a requirement. Bank statements, property deeds, management contracts, internal communications related to the trust's assets. The deadline was 10 business days. My parents missed it. Not completely. They sent partial records, summaries, explanations. But not originals. Not everything. Judge Keene responded with a single-page notice requesting compliance and reminding them of their fiduciary obligations. Melissa forwarded it to me with a note. This is where pressure starts. And it did. My mother called 3 times that week. I didn't answer. Lauren emailed once. Subject line, please think about this. I didn't open it. Instead, I focused on my work. The promotion I'd earned required travel now. Meetings in Milwaukee, site visits in Indianapolis. I welcomed the distraction. It reminded me that my competence existed independent of my family's validation. One afternoon, while I was in a conference room reviewing logistics projections, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You're hurting people who love you. I stared at it for a moment, then deleted it. That evening, Melissa called with news. They're stalling, she said, which suggests the accounting will show something they don't want highlighted. What kind of something? I asked. Revenue diversion, she replied. Management fees that don't align with market standards. Possibly compensation routed through Lauren. I felt a dull thud in my chest. Not surprise. Confirmation. Did she know? I asked. Melissa paused. She benefited. That was enough. The next week, Judge Keene issued a second notice. This one, less patient. It included language about potential court oversight if compliance continued to lag. Within 24 hours, the tone changed. Their attorney requested an extension, then proposed a meeting. Not mediation, a discussion. Melissa declined. Everything goes through the trustee now, she said. The first complete accounting arrived 3 days later. I read it at my kitchen table late at night, a cup of cold tea beside me. Page after page of numbers, explanations, footnotes. It was dense, technical. But one pattern stood out clearly. Over the past 4 years, income from 2 trust-owned properties had been redirected through a management company Lauren co-owned with her husband. The fees were legal, barely, inflated, questionable. Is this normal? I asked Melissa the next morning. It's aggressive, she said, and undisclosed. And my parents approved it? I asked. Yes, she replied. As trustees, I closed my eyes. This wasn't favoritism anymore. It was self-dealing. Judge Keene flagged the issue immediately. Her response was swift. A notice freezing further distributions from the trust until a full review was completed. Temporary. Procedural. But the impact was immediate. Lauren called me that night. I let it ring. She left a voicemail. You had no right to do this, she said, her voice tight with fury. You're putting my family at risk. I listened to it once. Then I saved it. That was new. 2 days later, my father showed up at my office. Security called first. There's a man here asking for you, the receptionist said. Says he's your father. I took a breath. Tell him I'm unavailable, I said. He can email my attorney. He didn't leave, quietly. According to security, he raised his voice, mentioned family, demanded 5 minutes. I stayed in the conference room until he was gone. When Melissa heard, she wasn't surprised. They're losing informal access, she said. That's when people panic. That weekend, my Aunt Helen called, my mother's sister. We'd never been close, but she'd always been kind. I don't agree with how they handled this, she said carefully. But this has gone far enough. Far enough for whom? I asked. For your parents, she said. I nodded. I understand. She hesitated. They didn't think you'd fight. I know, I replied. And now? She asked. Now they're accountable, I said. She sighed. I hope you know what you're doing. So did I. The next formal step came quietly. Judge Keene issued a preliminary finding. Not public, not fine, but clear. Failure to disclose material trust-related transactions, it read, constitutes a breach of fiduciary duty. Melissa called me as soon as it was issued. This changes leverage, she said, significantly. What does that mean for me? I asked. It means they're exposed, she replied, and they know it. That night, my mother sent a handwritten letter. Not an email, not a text. Ink on paper. She wrote about family, about misunderstanding, about how she never meant for things to go this far, about how my grandmother would be heartbroken. I read it slowly. Then I placed it in a folder with everything else, not because it mattered, but because it belonged to the record. The following Monday, Melissa sent me a draft, a proposed resolution framework, restitution, independent oversight, revised distributions, and an option, an exit. You don't have to take it, she said, but it's there. I stared at the page, an option to walk away with my share restored and documented, to disengage completely from the structure that had tried to erase me. For the first time since Christmas, I allowed myself to ask a different question. Not, how do I prove them wrong? But how do I want this to end? As I sat there, reading the proposal again, one thought rose clearly above the rest. Winning inside their system would still keep me inside it, and I was no longer sure that was what I wanted. The deadline for response was 10 days. I closed the document and leaned back in my chair. Whatever I chose next wouldn't be about revenge. It would be my freedom. And I knew, with quiet certainty, that this choice would change everything. I didn't answer the proposal right away. That wasn't. For most of my life, my reactions to my family had been immediate and emotional, even when I tried to hide it. Agree quickly, smooth things over, absorb discomfort so no one else had to. This time, I wanted space between stimulus and decision. Melissa respected that. Take the week, she said. Just don't take it lightly. I didn't. I spent the next few days doing something that felt strangely rebellious. I lived my life without thinking about them. I went to work. I led meetings. I handled a problem at one of our distribution centers that required a last-minute decision and trusted myself enough to make it without calling anyone for reassurance. My team responded well, better than well. They followed. That mattered more than I expected. On Thursday night, I met a friend for dinner. Someone who knew my family only through my stories. Halfway through the meal, she asked casually, "So if you win this, what changes?" I thought about it. "I don't know," I said. "Access, maybe?" She tilted her head. "Do you want access?" The question landed harder than anything Melissa or Judge Keene had said. I didn't answer right away. That night, I opened the proposal again. The exit option was clean, carefully structured. It outlined restitution for past distributions, corrected valuation of my interest, and a lump sum buyout that would sever my ties to the trust and the business permanently. No future claims, no obligations, no seat at the table. It also included something subtle but important. A written acknowledgement of fiduciary breach. Not an apology, not an admission of intent, but a record. They wanted closure. I wanted truth. This offered both. On Saturday morning, my father called again. I let it go to voicemail. His message was shorter this time. "Please don't do this." No explanation, no demand. Just that. I listened to it twice. Then I deleted it. That afternoon, I drove to my grandmother's old neighborhood. The house had been sold years ago, but the street looked the same. Quiet, modest, trees lining the sidewalks. No gates, no show. I parked and walked slowly, remembering afternoons spent there as a child. The way she used to ask me questions and actually wait for the answers. The way she'd look at my sister and me with the same expression, no comparison in her eyes. I stopped in front of the house and stood there longer than I meant to. She had built the trust because she didn't trust sentiment to survive money. I understood that now. On Monday morning, I called Melissa. "I want to modify the proposal," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "In what way?" "I want the exit," I said. "But I want it conditional." "Conditional how?" she asked. "Restitution first," I said. "Oversight until completion. And the breach acknowledgement stays." Another pause. "That will be harder for them to swallow," she said. "I know," I replied. "That's the point." Melissa didn't argue. "I'll revise it," she said. "And Natalie?" "Yes." "This isn't revenge," she said. "It's self-determination." I hung up feeling lighter. The revised proposal went out that afternoon. The response was immediate. Lauren called. I didn't answer. She texted. "You're destroying everything." I didn't reply. My mother emailed. "This is extreme. We raised you better than this." I closed it without responding. My father tried once more, this time through Melissa. He wanted to negotiate the acknowledgement language. Soften it. Remove references to breach. Melissa brought it to me. "They're afraid of precedent," she said. "And reputation." I nodded. "I'm afraid of erasure." We didn't budge. 3 days later, Judge Keene issued a formal notice confirming her preliminary findings. It wasn't dramatic, just clear. Trust administration failed to meet disclosure standards required under state law. That sentence changed everything. Within 48 hours, their attorney requested a settlement conference. Not mediation. Settlement. The meeting took place in a smaller room than before. No glass walls, no view. Just a table, and an understanding that time was no longer on their side. My parents looked different. Not defeated, but tired. Lauren didn't speak much. Their attorney did most of the talking. They accepted the framework. Restitution. Oversight. Exit. They asked for one thing. Silence. A non-disclosure clause. I shook my head. "I'm not telling my story," I said. "I'm not hiding it either." Melissa backed me without hesitation. They relented. The agreement was drafted over the next week, page by page, clause by clause. The acknowledgement stayed. The oversight period was set. The buyout amount finalized by an independent valuation firm. When Melissa sent me the final draft, I read it carefully. This wasn't a victory document. It was a boundary. I signed it on a Friday afternoon, not at my parents' house, not in a courtroom. In Melissa's office, with a cup of lukewarm coffee and no witnesses who mattered. As the pen left the paper, I felt something I hadn't expected. Grief, not for the money, not even for the family I'd lost, for the version of myself who had believed love meant compliance. That night, I went home and sat alone in my living room. The city hummed outside, cars passing, life continuing. I realized then that I wasn't angry anymore. I was finished. There were still steps ahead. Oversight, payments, final separation. But the direction was set. I had chosen not to fight for space in a system designed to limit me. I had chosen to leave it behind. And that choice, quiet and deliberate, felt like the most powerful thing I had ever done. The only question left was how they would react once they understood that this time, I wasn't coming back. That answer, I suspected, would arrive sooner than they wanted, and it would test whether distance was enough, or whether I would need to draw the line one last time. The first payment arrived without ceremony, no note, no explanation, just a wire transfer into the escrow account Melissa had set up in my name. The amount matched the agreement exactly, down to the dollar. Seeing it there didn't make me feel triumphant. It made everything real. This wasn't theoretical anymore. This wasn't posturing or negotiation. This was execution. Melissa called an hour later. They complied on schedule, she said. That's a good sign. A sign of what? I asked. Of fear, she replied. Not remorse. I believed her. The oversight period officially began that same week. Judge Keene's office sent out notices to all involved parties, outlining reporting requirements, restrictions on asset movement, and mandatory disclosures going forward. For the first time in decades, my parents weren't managing things privately. They were being watched. Lauren didn't take it well. I heard about it through a third party first. A former board member who had reached out months earlier asking for clarification now called to apologize. I didn't realize how much was being rerouted, he said. This review is thorough. That word came up again and again. Thorough. Within days, more irregularities surfaced. Not illegal enough to trigger criminal consequences, but enough to paint a clear picture of how casually rules had been bent under the assumption that no one would question them. I didn't comment, didn't react. That was the hardest part for my family to accept. I wasn't fighting anymore. I was letting the process work. Lauren finally showed up at my condo one evening, without warning. I opened the door and found her standing there, arms crossed, eyes sharp. We need to talk, she said. No, I replied calmly. We don't, she scoffed. You can't just cut us off. I didn't cut you off, I said. I stepped away. That's the same thing, she snapped. It isn't, I said. One is punishment. The other is self-respect. She pushed past me into the living room before I could stop her. You've always been jealous, she said, pacing. You couldn't stand that Mom and Dad trusted me more. I closed the door and turned to face her. They trusted you because you were predictable, I said, not because you were more capable. Her face flushed. You think you're better than us now? No, I said. I think I'm done proving anything. She stopped pacing. You took money, she said. You took what was supposed to stay in the family. I held her gaze. I took what was mine, I said. There's a difference. She laughed bitterly. You really believe that? Yes, I said, because it's documented. That landed harder than anything else. She looked around my condo, as if seeing it for the first time. This is where you wanted to end up? She asked. I nodded. It's where I chose to be. She left without another word. The next attempt came from my mother, a voicemail, softer than before. I don't recognize you anymore, she said. I don't know where I went wrong. I didn't call back. That wasn't a question. It was an accusation dressed up as confusion. At work, things shifted in a way I hadn't anticipated. My supervisor called me into her office one afternoon and closed the door. I've noticed something, she said. You've been more decisive lately. I waited. You're not second-guessing yourself, she continued. It's good leadership. I thanked her and left feeling oddly emotional. All those years of being told I was too sensitive, too independent, too much. It turned out those qualities weren't flaws. They were just inconvenient at home. The oversight review reached its midpoint in early March. Judge Keene issued an interim report. Again, not public, but damning in its precision. Pattern of non-disclosure. Preferential treatment. Informal decision-making inconsistent with fiduciary standards. Melissa summarized it simply. If this had gone to court, she said, they would have lost. I exhaled slowly. The second payment arrived on time. So did the third. Each one closed a chapter I didn't need to revisit. And yet, the tension didn't disappear. If anything, it sharpened. Because now that the financial leverage was gone, what remained was something far more volatile: identity. My parents didn't know who they were without control, and I was no longer willing to provide it. The breaking point came unexpectedly. A Thursday night. Late. I was folding laundry when my phone rang. An unfamiliar number, I answered. "Natalie," my father said. I closed my eyes. "This is the last time," he continued. "If you go through with the final exit, there will be consequences." I listened. "You think this ends cleanly," he said. "It won't. People will talk. Doors will close." I considered his words carefully. Then I said, "The doors you're talking about were never open to me." He fell silent. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. "No," I replied. "I'm making a choice." He hung up. That night, I lay awake longer than usual, not afraid. Resolute. The final oversight report was due in 3 weeks. After that, my exit would be complete. No more ties, no more obligations, no more access. I thought about everything my family had warned me I'd lose: support, security, belonging. What they never mentioned was how much I would gain: clarity, peace, agency. And as the final phase approached, I understood something crucial. They weren't angry because I'd hurt them. They were angry because I'd stopped needing them. That realization marked the point of no return. And whatever came next would confirm whether my family could tolerate a boundary they didn't control, or whether they would try one last time to cross it. The retaliation didn't come as an explosion. It came as a whisper. 2 weeks after the interim report, my name appeared in places it had never been before. Not headlines. Not lawsuits, conversations, questions, side glances that lingered half a second too long. It started at work. A colleague I trusted pulled me aside after a meeting. "I just wanted to give you a heads up," she said quietly. "Someone called HR asking about you." My stomach tightened. "Who?" "She wouldn't say," my colleague replied. "Just asked whether you were stable." That was the word. Stable. The same word my father had used to describe Lauren. "What did HR say?" I asked. "They said your performance reviews speak for themselves," she said. But it felt strange. It was strange and familiar. Melissa confirmed it later that afternoon. "They're trying to build a narrative," she said. "Nothing actionable yet, but they're planting seeds." "Can they do that?" I asked. "People can say anything," she replied. "Proving intent is harder." That night, I received an email from a recruiter I'd spoken with months earlier. Friendly, casual. "Hey Natalie, hope you're well. Just checking whether you're still open to new opportunities. Heard some mixed things and wanted to go straight to the source." Mixed things, I didn't reply. I forwarded it to Melissa instead. She didn't hesitate. "This is escalation," she said, "and it's clumsy." "How do we stop it?" I asked. "We don't," she replied. "We document it." So I did. Every call. Every email, every indirect message that hinted at concern, instability, or reputation. Patterns emerged quickly. All of it traced back to one place: my family's circle. They weren't attacking me legally. They were trying to make me radioactive. The irony wasn't lost on me. They had spent decades telling me I was too independent. Now they were afraid I might be. Lauren made her move next. She didn't contact me directly. She contacted my supervisor, not with accusations, with concern. My supervisor called me in the following morning. "Someone reached out claiming to be worried about you," she said. "They said you've been under a lot of stress." I nodded. "That's true. But they implied it might be affecting your judgment," she continued. I met her eyes. "Has it?" She paused. "No," she said. "Your work has been excellent." "Then I trust you'll judge me by that," I replied. She smiled faintly. "I already do." That conversation ended any attempt to undermine me at work, but it confirmed something important. They were willing to cross lines. That afternoon, Melissa and I met in her office. "This behavior strengthens your position," she said, "especially if it continues." "How?" I asked. "Because retaliation following a fiduciary finding is not a good look," she said, "especially documented retaliation." She suggested a preemptive step, a formal notice. Not a lawsuit. Not yet. A letter warning against further interference in my employment or reputation. "If they ignore it," she said, "we escalate." "Will that make things worse?" I asked. "Yes," she said calmly. "For them." We sent the letter. The response was immediate. My father emailed Melissa directly. He accused her of overreaching, of inflaming tensions, of manipulating me. Melissa forwarded it to me without comment. I read it once. Then I archived it. The oversight process reached its final stage the following week. Judge Keene requested in-person testimony from the trustees. Not from me. From them. I wasn't present. I didn't need to be. But I received the summary afterward. They had tried to explain their decisions as protective, strategic, necessary. Judge Keene had asked one question that cut through everything. Why was one beneficiary informed and the other not? No one had a satisfactory answer. Her final report was issued 3 days later. It was longer than the interim one, more detailed, more conclusive. Breach confirmed, restitution appropriate, oversight justified, and most importantly, the acknowledgement language remained intact. Melissa called me that evening. "It's done," she said. "You're protected." I sat in silence for a long moment. "Then why does it feel like they're still reaching for me?" I asked. "Because this isn't about money anymore," she replied. "It's about control." That night, my mother called. I answered, for the first time in months. "Natalie," she said, her voice unsteady. "We need to stop this." "Stop what?" I asked. "This division," she said. "This destruction." I thought carefully before responding. "You built a system that excluded me," I said. "I didn't destroy it. I exposed it." She began to cry. "We did what we thought was best," she said. "For whom?" I asked. She didn't answer. "I'm not angry," I continued, "but I'm not coming back." There was a long silence. "You think this makes you free?" she said finally. "I know it does," I replied. She hung up. 2 days later, the final payment was scheduled. After that, my formal exit would be complete. The retaliation attempts slowed. Not because they'd stopped wanting to control the narrative, because the narrative was no longer theirs. People were noticing, quietly, subtly. Board members stepping back, partners asking questions, friends choosing distance. The cost of their behavior was becoming visible. And I realized something then. The most effective revenge wasn't confrontation. It was consequence. I had taken nothing from them. I had simply refused to be erased. And that refusal was forcing them to sit with something they had avoided for years. The truth. As the final days approached, I felt something unexpected. Not fear, anticipation. Because once the last document was signed, there would be no pretense left, no reason to engage, no incentive to explain, just a clean line. And whatever they tried after that would no longer be my responsibility to manage. It would be theirs. The only question was whether they would accept it, or try one last time to pull me back into a story I had already left behind. The final payment cleared on a Tuesday morning. I knew the exact time because Melissa emailed me the confirmation the moment it happened. No congratulations, no commentary, just a screenshot and a single line. All obligations satisfied. I stared at my phone for a long time before setting it face down on the table. That was it. No more escrow. No more oversight clock. No more leverage on either side. The exit was complete. I went to work anyway. There was something grounding about following a normal routine on a day that quietly split my life into before and after. I answered emails, reviewed a shipment delay, signed off on a budget revision. No one around me knew that a chapter spanning decades had just closed, and that anonymity felt like relief. The silence didn't last. That afternoon, my father's name appeared on my screen again. This time, I didn't let it go to voicemail. "Yes," I said. "So it's done," he said. "Yes," I replied. He exhaled. "You got what you wanted." I considered that. "I got what was owed," I said. "Those aren't the same thing." There was a pause. "You didn't have to take it this far," he said. "I didn't," I replied. "You did." Long before I noticed, his voice hardened. "You think this makes you right." "No," I said. "It makes me finished." Another pause. Longer this time. "What happens now?" he asked. I looked out the window at the parking lot below. People coming and going, lives intersecting briefly before continuing on. "Now," I said, "we don't speak unless there's something new to say." "That's it?" he asked. "After everything?" "That's the boundary," I replied. He didn't argue. He hung up. That evening, Lauren posted a photo online. A family photo. My parents, her husband, the kids. A caption about resilience and moving forward together. I wasn't in it. That too felt appropriate. I muted her account without blocking it. Not out of spite, out of practicality. The next move came quietly, through the mail. A formal notice from the Harper Group announcing internal restructuring. New titles, new reporting lines. No mention of the trust. No mention of oversight. It was clean, corporate, forgettable. But tucked into the envelope was something else. A handwritten note from my mother. Just one sentence. I hope someday you understand. We did this out of love. I folded the paper and placed it in the same folder as the others. Love that requires silence isn't love. It's compliance. That weekend, I drove north again, this time without the weight I'd carried on my shoulders for months. I stopped at a small diner along the highway, ordered coffee, and sat alone by the window. For the first time since Christmas, I let myself ask a question I'd avoided. Who am I without this fight? The answer didn't come all at once. It came in fragments. I was someone who trusted her instincts, someone who didn't confuse familiarity with safety, someone who no longer mistook endurance for strength. At work, the effects of the attempted sabotage became visible in reverse. A recruiter reached out again, this time more directly. I wanted to apologize for earlier, she said. We verified your references. You're highly regarded. I thanked her and declined the opportunity, not because I wasn't interested, because I didn't need to run anymore. Melissa called me the following week for what she called a post-mortem. Everything is wrapped, she said. There's nothing pending. Good, I replied. There is one thing, she added. Your parents' attorney asked whether you'd be open to revisiting the non-disclosure terms. I smiled faintly. No, I thought so, she said. I'll respond accordingly. After the call, I deleted the contact thread with my parents from my phone. Not blocked, just removed. If they needed to reach me for something real, they could do so through proper channels. If they wanted access, they'd lost it. The shift inside me became noticeable in small ways. I stopped over-explaining, stopped rehearsing conversations that would never happen, stopped anticipating disappointment. At a team dinner, a colleague asked about my family. Casual, polite. They're fine, I said, and meant it. Fine, as in contained. Thanksgiving came and went without an invitation. Christmas approached again. Quietly. I made plans with friends instead. The absence didn't hurt the way it once had. It felt like an open space I could fill intentionally. On Christmas Eve, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Merry Christmas. We miss you. No signature. I didn't respond. I spent the evening cooking, music playing softly, lights dimmed just enough to feel warm. At midnight, I poured a glass of wine and stood by the window, watching snow begin to fall. A year ago, I'd been asked to come early and set a table for a conversation that erased me. Now, there was no table I hadn't chosen myself. That realization settled deeply. Revenge had never been my goal. Neither had forgiveness. What I wanted was agency, and I had it. The power hadn't shifted because I took something from them. It shifted because I stopped giving them access to define me. As the year ended, I understood something I wished I'd known sooner. You don't have to convince people who benefit from your silence that they're wrong. You just have to stop being silent. The story wasn't over yet, but it was no longer theirs to tell. And that made all the difference. The quiet after a long conflict has its own sound. It's not silence exactly. It's the absence of tension you didn't realize had become background noise. The constant calculation. The waiting, the instinct to brace for impact every time your phone lights up. Once that stopped, I noticed everything else. I noticed how well I slept, how I stopped grinding my teeth at night, how my shoulders dropped naturally instead of staying tight, as if expecting to be pulled back into something I didn't consent to. I also noticed something less comforting. My family hadn't stopped talking about me. They just stopped talking to me. It showed up in small ways. A mutual acquaintance, mentioning that my mother had said I was taking time to heal. A former family friend, asking whether I was doing better now. Questions that assumed instability without stating it outright. I didn't correct them. I let the ambiguity exist. Melissa warned me that this phase was common. When people lose control, they rewrite history, she said. It's how they protect their self-image. That rewriting became more obvious when the Harper Group announced a leadership retreat in Arizona. Lauren posted photos online. Strategic planning, legacy discussions, quotes about unity and vision, all of it carefully curated. Still no mention of me. Again, appropriate. At work, my focus sharpened in ways that surprised even me. I was no longer distracted by side narratives or emotional residue. I took on a restructuring project no one else wanted. It was messy, high risk, but I saw it clearly. The board approved my proposal unanimously. A month later, my supervisor offered me a new role, director level, expanded authority, more visibility. You don't hesitate anymore, she said. You decide. I accepted without asking anyone for advice. That might sound small. It wasn't. The hardest moment of that month came unexpectedly. My cousin Emily called. We'd grown up close, drifted apart as adults. I hope it's okay that I'm calling, she said. It's okay, I replied. She hesitated. I just wanted you to know, not everyone believes what they're saying. I waited. They're saying you walked away from money, she continued, that you forced their hand. I felt a flicker of something. Not anger, recognition. That's easier for them, I said. Yes, she agreed. But I saw the documents, not all of them. Enough. She exhaled. I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. Thank you, I said, and meant it. When we hung up, I realized something important. I didn't need vindication. I needed distance. That same week, my father tried once more. An email. Short. Controlled. Your mother is struggling. This has taken a toll on her health. I read it twice, then forwarded it to Melissa. Her response was immediate. This is emotional leverage, she wrote. You are not responsible for their reaction to accountability. I didn't reply to him. I blocked his email address instead. Not in anger. In acknowledgement that this channel would never be used responsibly. The final loose end came through the trustee. Judge Keene sent a closing notice, confirming that oversight had concluded and no further action was required. Her language was clinical, neutral. But one sentence stood out. Beneficiary concerns were substantiated. That was it. No praise, no condemnation, just record. I printed the letter and placed it in a drawer, not as a trophy, as a reminder. In early spring, I made a decision that had nothing to do with my family. I put my condo on the market. It sold in 6 days. I moved closer to the city, into a smaller place with more light and fewer memories. A fresh layout, no ghost in the corners. On my first night there, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time. Hope. Not the fragile kind, tied to other people changing. The solid kind, tied to knowing I would be okay, even if they didn't. I thought about the younger version of myself. The one who'd believed that loyalty meant staying quiet. That love was something you earned by being useful. I wished I could tell her this. You don't have to be chosen to choose yourself. The story was almost done, but there was one final moment, one last shift in power that I hadn't anticipated. And it would arrive not through lawyers or money, but through absence. Because when you stop responding, stop engaging, stop orbiting the people who defined you for their own comfort, something unsettling happens. They have to sit with the version of themselves they can't project onto you anymore. And not everyone survives that confrontation intact. I didn't know yet how my family would handle that reckoning. But I knew this. Whatever came next, I would meet it on my terms. And I would not step back into a role I had outgrown. The absence did what confrontation never could. It stripped away their leverage. Weeks passed without contact. No messages routed through friends, no sudden emergencies, no carefully worded appeals to guilt. At first, I assumed they were regrouping, recalibrating their approach the way they always had. But something else was happening. They were unraveling. I heard about it indirectly, always indirectly. A former supplier mentioned that payments were being delayed. A board member quietly declined to renew his term. A family friend let slip that my father had stepped back from several decisions he'd once guarded obsessively. Lauren, I learned, had taken on more responsibility than she'd anticipated. That was the irony. She had wanted control without resistance, authority without accountability. When those things finally became hers in full, the weight didn't look the way she'd imagined. The Harper Group was still standing, still profitable. But the illusion of effortless leadership was gone. And without me to blame, There was nowhere for the tension to go. The moment I understood this fully came on a Wednesday afternoon. I was in my new apartment, taking a late lunch on the balcony, when my phone buzzed with a message from an unfamiliar number. It was Lauren. "I need to talk to you." I stared at the screen. For a long moment, I considered ignoring it. That had become my default. Silence had served me well, but something about the timing felt different. "About what?" I replied. Several minutes passed before she responded. "Dad." That single word carried more weight than any accusation. We agreed to meet in a public place, a quiet cafe halfway between our neighborhoods. Neutral territory. No history attached to the walls. She arrived late. Lauren looked thinner. Not unkempt, just tired in a way that couldn't be styled away. She ordered coffee she didn't drink, and sat across from me with her hands folded tightly in her lap. "This isn't easy for me," she said. "I didn't expect it to be," I replied. She swallowed. "Dad had a mild stroke." The words landed softly, but firmly. "When?" I asked. 2 weeks ago," she said. "He's recovering. Physically." "And?" I asked. She hesitated. "He's different." I waited. "He keeps asking about you," she said. "Not in the way you think. Not apologizing. Just confused. Angry. Like he can't understand why things don't work the way they used to." I took a slow breath. "I'm sorry he's unwell," I said. "Truly." "But," she pressed. "But that doesn't change anything," I replied. Her jaw tightened. "You could at least call him." I shook my head. That wouldn't help him. Or me. She leaned forward. "You don't know that." "I do," I said calmly, because the call wouldn't be about his health. It would be about restoring order. She looked away. "He thinks you abandoned us," she said. I met her eyes. "He abandoned fairness long before I left." That stung her. I could see it. "You always think you're right," she snapped. "No," I said. "I think I'm clear." She sat back, frustration flashing across her face. "You know what this has done to Mom?" she said. "She barely leaves the house. She tells everyone she doesn't understand how her family fell apart." I said nothing. "You could fix this," Lauren continued, "just by showing up, by being reasonable." I almost laughed. "Reasonable," I repeated. "You mean compliant." She opened her mouth, then closed it. The truth hovered between us, heavy and unspoken. Finally, she asked the real question. "What do you want?" I considered it carefully. "I want distance," I said, "and I want it respected." "That's it?" she asked incredulously. "That's everything," I replied. She stared at me, as if trying to recognize a version of me she could negotiate with. "You don't miss us?" she asked. I didn't answer immediately. "I miss who I thought we could be," I said. "But I don't miss who we actually were." She looked down at her hands. "Dad says you've changed," she said quietly. I nodded. I had to. The conversation ended shortly after that. No resolution, no reconciliation. Just acknowledgement that the roles we'd played no longer fit. As we stood to leave, Lauren hesitated. "For what it's worth," she said, "I didn't think you'd last this long." I met her gaze. "Neither did you," I said. That night, I thought about my father. About the man who had believed control equaled stability. About the system he'd built, and the silence he'd relied on to maintain it. Illness has a way of exposing truths people spend decades avoiding. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt certain. The boundary I'd set wasn't punishment. It was preservation. A few days later, my mother sent a letter through the mail. Not an appeal, not a plea. Just an update about my father's condition. Factual, restrained, almost professional. At the end, she wrote one line. "I don't know how to reach you anymore." I read it once. Then I placed it with the others. Not as evidence, as history. Because understanding how to reach me had never been the problem. Respecting where I stood had been. The final shift came quietly, the way all real changes do. I stopped wondering whether I was being too harsh. Stopped measuring my decisions against imagined reactions. Stopped waiting for permission to move on. What my family was facing now wasn't my absence. It was the consequence of having defined love as control and loyalty as silence. I had removed myself from that equation, and without me absorbing the tension, it had nowhere to go. Chapter 12 would not be about confrontation. It would be about closure. Not the kind that comes from apologies or reconciliation. The kind that comes when you finally stop carrying what was never yours to hold. Closure didn't arrive the way I used to imagine it would. There was no final conversation where everything was said clearly. No apology that landed cleanly. No moment where my parents suddenly understood the cost of what they'd done and named it out loud. Instead, closure arrived quietly, over time, in the absence of reaction. It arrived the first morning I woke up and realized I hadn't dreamed about my family at all. It arrived the day I made a decision at work without wondering how my father would judge it, or whether my mother would call it reckless, or whether Lauren would quietly resent it. It arrived when I stopped rehearsing explanations in my head for people who no longer had access to my life. The last official loose end closed in early summer. Melissa called me one final time, her tone lighter than it had been in months. "Everything is complete," she said. "No outstanding matters. No future obligations." "Thank you," I replied. "You handled this with restraint," she added. "A lot of people confuse revenge with destruction. You didn't." "I didn't want to destroy anything," I said. "I wanted to stop being diminished." After we hung up, I deleted the remaining legal folders from my desktop. Not out of denial, out of completion. The documents existed. The record existed. I didn't need to carry it forward every day. A week later, I received a message from Judge Keene's office. Brief, procedural, case closed. That was it. No moral, no commentary, just finality. I sat on my balcony that evening, watching the city settle into dusk, and thought about how much energy I had spent trying to be understood by people who benefited from misunderstanding me. I thought about the Christmas table, the folder, the waiver, the quiet expectation that I would comply because I always had. I understood now that my family hadn't trusted me with power because they couldn't control me once I had it. That realization no longer hurt. It explained everything. My father's health stabilized over the summer. I heard that through indirect channels. No requests followed, no pressure to reconcile, just updates that drifted toward me and passed on. Lauren stopped reaching out entirely. I didn't take that as peace. I took it as acceptance. My mother's letters slowed, then stopped. The last one contained no questions, no appeals, just a description of her garden, the way the roses had bloomed later than expected that year. I read it. I didn't respond. For the first time, silence wasn't something I used to protect others. It was something I used to protect myself. My life filled in around the absence. I traveled for work, took on projects that would have once intimidated me, built relationships that weren't transactional, where affection didn't come with expectations or strings. I hosted my own Thanksgiving that year. Nothing elaborate. Friends, laughter. A table I set because I wanted to, not because I was assigned to. As we ate, someone asked casually, "Are you close with your family?" I paused, then said, "Not in the traditional sense." No follow-up was needed. That answer felt honest, without being defensive. On the anniversary of the Christmas dinner that had started everything, I took the day off and did nothing remarkable. Coffee, a long walk, dinner alone. I thought about the woman I had been then. The one who showed up early, eager to be helpful, assuming that inclusion was just around the corner if she tried hard enough. I felt compassion for her, but I didn't miss her, because she had mistaken proximity for belonging. What I know now is this. Family isn't defined by who gets access to you. It's defined by who respects your autonomy. Love isn't proven by how much disrespect you can endure. It's proven by how little you're asked to erase yourself. Walking away didn't make me cold. It didn't make me selfish. It didn't make me unforgiving. It made me accurate. Accurate about who my family was. Accurate about what they were willing to give. Accurate about what I was no longer willing to accept. I didn't win by taking something from them. I won by refusing to keep paying the price of admission. If you're listening to this and you recognize yourself somewhere in it, if you've been excluded quietly, managed gently, erased politely by people who insist they love you, hear this clearly. You don't need their permission to leave. You don't need to convince them you're worthy. You don't need a dramatic confrontation to justify choosing yourself. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't payback. It's clarity. It's structure. It's the moment you stop explaining and start deciding. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to choose dignity over belonging, boundaries over approval, or truth over comfort, Take a moment to like this video, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever walked away from a family dynamic that demanded your silence? You're not alone. And sometimes, the bravest inheritance isn't money or property or a name. It's the quiet certainty that your life finally belongs to you.